So, we're going to talk today about energy optimization and the challenge, the still present challenge of intermittency. So, I think this is a very good conversation to have with you. And I wanted to ask you first, isn't intermittency like an old school kind of problem? Why are we still talking about it? Like, why is it still a challenge that hasn't been fully resolved?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, when the whole energy transition started, and we just started with solar and wind, nobody worried so much about intermittency, and then people were talking about it for a while, and then suddenly your grid start having too much renewable penetration, grid becomes unstable, and everybody was aware of intermittency. Being aware and being able to address it effectively is two different things. And what we find is that I use an analogy, I call it the carbon impact curve. But here's the point. If you've got renewables coming in, what you're trying to do is displace the carbon, right? So ideally what you're trying to do is have at least a 1-to-1 ratio. For every dollar you spend, you're displacing a unit of carbon. That works well in a simple equation. But when it gets really complex, and the more renewables you add in, and the more the system starts facing constraints that you didn't originally assume, the more difficult that becomes. And that is where the intermittency challenge lies. So if you listen to a lot of speakers today, they were talking about intermittency in various shapes or forms quite often. The grid constraints are not just pure constraints for supplying the pipeline, but it's also keeping that grid stable. The end consumers, the EV batteries, car batteries that are being used in the grid, all those kind of things, they're being used not just to create stability in the grid, but also deal with the intermittency. And that's why I still think it's an incredibly relevant point for an effective energy transition.
It looks like we are already harvest the low-hanging fruit, and now it's the hardest part to come. And as you said, the most renewables we add, the more difficult the challenge of intermittency comes. So I wanted to ask you, like, what are the main? I mean, you just mentioned that, like some like the main bottlenecks that we are having, and what is the role of storage in order to solve the intermittency issue?
Yes, storage is interesting because storage is valuable in two ways. One, as a pure technology, it's really good for shifting renewables. So it's maximizing the renewable output you have. But it's also proven very adept at helping bring stability into the grid. I think the one thing about stability and the balancing mix, there's no one single solution, and that's really important to appreciate. It doesn't matter who you talk to. Very often they try and converge to one technology that's going to sort out stability in your grid. It's not. There's many different technologies because the job of stability is so complex. What we've seen is that, especially in the more advanced markets where price discovery is in minute intervals, US, Australia, UK, these kind of markets, storage is becoming very dynamic in terms of the set of jobs it can address. So it can address from synthetic inertia into the grid, to frequency control, to all those kind of things. So it's very, very useful, but that's as in a technology. What makes storage really interesting is the software and the system behind it. That's why they call it battery energy storage systems. It's that system and the ability of that to interface with the rest of the grid that actually makes it much more interesting. And it kind of paves the way for digitalization for the rest of the grid as well. It's that integration that it provides.
That sounds, and with that, I wanted to open to a second question or to the next question. We just mentioned digitalization. I just came from another panel. We were talking about demand management and micromanagement of electricity demand, and can we help this issue of intermittency with trying to match also demand to supply? So let me ask you, what kind of tools can digitalization bring to this question?
Yeah, digitalization, it kind of starts off with that storage discussion about the systemic interface. It's really useful for that. It sets the path, but if you listen to earlier discussions today as well, a lot of it was about, what happens at the edge of the grid. And digitalization is essential for that. But I think the most useful thing is the best electron is the one you never use. And the more your grid is digitalized, the better you can avoid the use of that unnecessary electron. Because it's more efficient, it's more stable, you're using at the right time, so you're using less generation to affect the same results. And that's why when it interfaces from a digitalization perspective, it's really useful. But the biggest challenges are digitalization cannot happen on its own. It needs proper market structures. You can see it globally, wherever you go. When the market structures are looking at minute level intervals, then digitalization starts shining. Or when a big vendor, take Octopus earlier today, I mean, they are creating this market because they can control these things up to very small levels. But where you have markets that are far behind that are still thinking in day-ahead markets, in 1 hour blocks, it becomes very difficult to create that digitalization. The other thing linked to that is that it is also about the people. I mean, that's part of the topic of this panel, but digitalization cannot happen without the people in the picture. It's like taking a keyboard and trying to plug it into a printing press, right? It's counterproductive. So the people also need to get used to living in a more digitalized world. The systems, the management systems, everything need to fit that. And also digitalization is a two-way street. Yes, it starts at the edge of the grid, it starts at the front end, it's about demand-side management, but it's just so much about the generation side of it. The more effective the generation becomes digitalized, the more effective different generation technologies start interfacing in a much more digital manner, the more effective the energy transition. And just going back to that carbon impact curve I was talking about, for every dollar you're spending or every euro you're spending, it is so important to make sure that you maximize the return. You can't do that without a good digitalization strategy that's supported by a good market and a good people strategy as well.
That's perfect. You just mentioned the importance of people embracing digitalization. How can like systems, markets and systems like push people to adapt to this new technology?
A lot of it also starts with discovering price, right? You will not change if you don't have a price discovery. For example, in some countries, I live in one where there's a wonderful subsidy for producing power from solar. So if that's there, you don't have a lot of incentive to become scarce with the power you're consuming, to not put too many solar panels on your roof more than you actually need, because you have this kind of subsidy structures, etc. So subsidies distort behaviors. Yes, it also encourages behaviors, but it's a two-way street, and it's a big challenge in the energy transition is to make sure you don't, and it was lovely today. I was hearing so many times the use of the word carrot to encourage behavior. There also needs to be a stick, right? And one of those is pricing for the behavior you're taking. Not just in terms of people changing their consumption patterns, etc., but also their choice patterns. The other thing that kept coming up today was NIMBYism, or where did it start with bananas, or whatever the case is. But I haven't heard anybody say, yes, so what is the tax or the consequence price for not making that decision? I think it's one of the biggest challenges. Yes, you don't want the pylon right next to you, so you can say no, but there's no consequence to you saying no, other than you not having the pylon. If we start bringing in the pricing of that, because society is paying a higher price for your system, then you'll start thinking differently about avoiding that pylon in your neighborhood.
I assume that the combination of more granular pricing strategy with smart meters and digitalization can create a situation where you can tell, I mean, as a consumer, you won't be checking the price all the time to see how much you consume, but you can tell the smart meter, turn the washing machine on, or turn just when the prices are below this level, and can be like more better achieved?
Yes, I think that interface is going to come and going to start developing. We're still a way off. I mean, to get not just the consumer, but I think the other thing, there was a lot of discussion about transmission, but a lot less about the distribution side of it. And if you kind of step outside the UK and to some extent if you step outside Europe, but even there you have the challenge. But at a distribution level is probably the biggest system change that still needs to happen. Many of these distribution entities are municipalities, are small entities that are not geared for the amount of information, of data, of systems change, of management change that's actually needed to be effective. And that distribution level is where our next layer of investment needs to be. Yes, transmission is really important, but you have to make it work also with distribution. But if I can just touch on something else, going granular with these systems is incredibly important because if your market structure creates that, it paves the way for the digitalization, and that paves the way for efficiency as well. But going granular also lets you discover better price in terms of what are the best kind of tools in your system. The one analogy I love using is if you just compare your house to gas thermal technologies, often people just say, oh, well, a turbine will sort that out. What you got to think about of turbine being the big circuit breaker in your house, so it's a big thing you switch on and off for bigger level events. And think of the light switch or the plug point that you're switching being the engine that goes on and off. And what's really interesting is as we've seen the markets go granular, right through from Australia all the way to the US, UK, etc., the more they go granular, the more you see that technology mix changing. So suddenly it's not just turbines, it's engines as well. So we can see that change. The other change we're also seeing is in terms of people thinking wider on the energy systems. So right now, a lot of talk is about electrification. And you heard some statements today like, well, just electrify it. Well, sorry, you're not going to electrify everything, especially when you're looking at heating and cooling combined with the power. And what we're seeing is that there's a bit of a gap in terms of the modeling around bringing the heating and cooling together with the electricity. When you start doing that and you start co-optimizing for the system and not just the specific need, you actually get much more system savings. We did a quick study in Poland where, well, not a quick study, but a study in Poland where by 2032, if they just moved away from coal, brought in some gas generation and co-optimized that with the district heating, you save around about 3.8 billion euros. And you drop your carbon footprint by 57%. But to do that, you also need policy pragmatism. You can't just look at a single solution that has to be green immediately. What you're going to have to do, it's like layers of an onion. You're going to have to take step by step and say, okay, at this moment in time, my best investment decision or my best policy support is for a certain technology. Then you're going to go a little bit further and you're going to say, okay, now we'll have the best impact for transmission lines. Then you're going to go further and say, okay, now the best impact is going to be on the distribution side. But there is no absolute term where you can just cut out one technology and assume you're going to replace it with something else. And I think that's also the challenge with storage. It's highly effective at what it does. It's the same as with thermal technologies, etc. They're very effective at what they do, but they are not a single solution. It's about looking at the whole system and what that delivers to really add value to it.
That's perfect. Well, I mean, it's just in time. That has been amazing. Thank you very much, Luis, for having you. I hope you enjoy the talk as much as I did. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.